And I will officially start our meeting with the ringing of the bell. So I've got two bells. I've got my bell from Melly, my Melly bell. The Melly bell officially starts our meeting. So again, welcome everyone. I have a couple of welcoming comments. One is to thank everyone for your hard work on the peach sale. Your hard work, your patience. We talked about it a little bit when we started the call, when someone was asking how many did we sell. It was what, 1,136 or 036? Somewhere around there. And some boxes were purchased and donated to the local food bank. So that is also an exciting development. We had two kinds of peaches, like the primary peach, the prime good peaches, and we had some peaches that, according to the grower, were not quite primed. And so we sent them to the food bank, who could use them over a couple days and make some peach goodies for the food bank recipients. So thank you for all of that. And my other welcoming comment is around the membership committee. They meet immediately following this call. So if you're interested in joining, all are welcome. And you can either reach out to me or Chad Tyler, who is on the call, and get the information to join. So with that, I would ask you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Your lines are muted, so if you'll follow along. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Mark Whipper. Mark is our service team co-chair. He is also the director of major gifts at Regis University for our inspirational moment.
Thanks, Debbie. I got inspired to do a little research on Temple Buell, because being new to Denver, I didn't know who he was. And I thought, since the speakers today are supported by scholarships with his name on it, I thought, well, I better find out who this guy is. So I'm just going to share that with you. Some of you may already know some of this or all of this, or maybe even none of it. Temple Buell was born in 1895 to a prominent Chicago family. His grandfather was a reform mayor of Chicago, and his great-grandfather was among the 13 pioneers who incorporated the village of Chicago in 1833. He studied architecture at the University of Illinois, pursued graduate studies at Columbia University. During World War I, Mr. Buell served in France, where he was exposed to phosgene gas. Diagnosed with life-threatening tuberculosis, Mr. Buell moved to Denver for treatment in 1921. He regained his health and went on to establish the largest architectural firm in the Rocky Mountain region. More than 300 Buell-designed buildings are part of Colorado's architectural legacy, including designated landmarks such as the Paramount Theater and Horace Mann Middle School. The Paramount Theater is also listed in the National Register of Historic Places. Mr. Buell earned recognition nationally as an architectural visionary, particularly for the conceptualization of the first Central Mall shopping center designed with the parking lots encircling the shops. He presented his concept to the Urban Land Institute in 1946 and later built the original Cherry Creek Shopping Center in accordance with his vision. This model became the prototype of today's shopping centers. His distinctive career and numerous achievements were recognized with the awarding of honorary doctorate degrees from Columbia and the University of Colorado. He was posthumously inducted into the Colorado Business Hall of Fame in 2013. He died at age 94 in 1990. So I thought that was great to share that with everybody, and now you know a lot more about Temple Buell.
Thank you. I realize now that I share an alma mater undergraduate with Mr. Buell. So that's a new fun fact for me. Thank you. All right, our club secretary's report is brought to you today by Troy Szymanski, our club secretary. Troy is a partner and fund manager of Outpost Fund. So Troy.
Thank you very much, Debbie. All right, let's start with welcoming our many guests today. First off, we have Ann Tull, who is a visiting Rotarian from the Mile High Club. We also have David Willman, the district TRF chair. Again, we have Doreen Mubala visiting us from Uganda today, so welcome back. Next, we have Jillian Marzo, as well as Joanne and John Marzo, who are a guest of our speaker. Finally, we have Sarah McNeil and Susan Steele. Also want to welcome anybody else who we might have missed and say thanks for joining us this early afternoon. Next up, we have some birthdays this week that we want to celebrate. So if you have the chance, reach out through the chat, send an email, send a card to Paul Andrews, Pam Adams, and Rich Spong. Happy birthday to all of you. Finally, some announcements. Please note that the Rotary Happy Hour that traditionally takes place on Thursdays, will be canceled this week. So if you're a little disappointed, package that disappointment and join us next week when we will resume our normal schedule on September 20th. Next week is not September 20th, it's September 24th probably. 20. Either way, we'll resume next week. Next, save the date. Thursday, October 1st will be an in-person and Zoom hybrid meeting at the Warwick Hotel. Our speaker is Rotarian Bob Hardaway, professor of law at the University of Denver Strum College of Law, for a program titled The Electoral College, the U.S. Senate, and the Constitution, the Case for Preserving Federalism. We know there are many people who are not going out in public just yet, so we will live stream the meeting via Zoom from the hotel. For in-person attendance only, we will require reservations since they have a 50-person capacity due to state regulations. The club and hotel will be taking very strict COVID safety precautions to protect our members and guests, and so more information on this will follow. That's all from me. Back to you, President Debbie.
All right, thank you, Troy. And Rich, you share a birthday with my father, so I'm like learning all kinds of things today. All right, with that, I am going to hand it over to Bill Korsgaard, who is our World Community Services Committee member. And that doesn't even begin to describe all the work that Bill does on that committee. And he is also a partner at Support One. So Bill. Let's see, Bill. Bill, it looks like you're muted.
There we go.
There we go.
Sorry.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks, Debbie. This is the first in a series, we hope, of monthly meetings describing things that we do in the World Community Service. It's called Where in the World is Club 31? Well, this month, Club 31 is in Burkina Faso on the western hump of Africa. Between 2008 and 2014, we had 4 water, sanitation, and hygiene projects in Burkina Faso, building 12 wells, 20 hand washing stations, 52 latrines, and helping approximately 7,800 people. Our objective was to provide clean water and foster safe hygiene practices. Our goal was to reduce incidences of waterborne diseases, which we accomplished. But that's not the end of the story. What happened later, the things you don't hear about, is equally important. Or as Paul Harvey would say when he was on the radio, and now the rest of the story. To spread awareness of WASH, we built a traveling theater company with the cooperation of Cirque du Soleil and their NGO called One Drop Foundation. We held hygiene awareness performances for the 7,800 people in the 12 villages and had enough money left over to hold 4 additional performances in other villages. It was a great success. We definitely increased awareness. Eventually, USAID got wind of our efforts and they came to us and they loved the idea and they hired our staff and they hired the performers of the theater company and they used our old sets. They took the show on the road to another 32 villages, spreading hygiene awareness to another 14,000 people. So rather than just helping 7,800 people, we reached out to 21,000 people. This occurred after our project's official end. The project's officially ended, but the benefits keep flowing. People always ask about the sustainability of these projects. They hear the horror stories, about promising projects that ultimately fail after the sponsor goes home. To prevent that, we insist on a rigid program of sustainability. Each village has a water committee made up of 3 men and 3 women responsible for the well. At the end of the growing season, the committee collects a small amount of money from each family. Money goes into a bank account, which they control. When something breaks, the committee arranges the repairs and pays for it. We have the money to pay, they have the money to pay for it. When I last checked a couple of months ago, all the wells I just described that we built over those years are still in operation, sustained by the efforts of the community. We tend to treat our interventions, such as building a well or any other intervention, for that matter, as a one and done. Traditionally, we would build it and forget about it and move on to the next project. But the benefits continue to accrue year after year as long as the sustainability stays in place. Several studies that have shown that improving water and sanitation conditions dramatically reduces the number of diarrhea incidences over the life of a child. That significantly increases the child. So if we can eliminate that, it significantly increases the child's time in school, and as a result, their opportunity for overall education attainment. This is an important but underreported benefit. Some people wonder about project sustainability in areas now under terrorist threat or control. Al-Qaeda and its affiliates were particularly deadly in a series of attacks in Burkina Faso in 2016, 17, and 18. But so far, our sites have not been affected. There is considerable evidence that projects like ours increases a community's cohesion while remedying many of the village's health problems. This social cohesion comes from accomplishing shared tasks and deriving shared benefits. The water sanitation situation is the results of everyone's continued efforts. So terrorists like to feast where there's communities with divisions and unresolved problems of health problems, but strong, healthy communities don't make easy targets. It's another significant but underappreciated benefit. So we have clean water, proper sanitation, reduced illness, better education outcomes, leveraging success with other organizations, improving community cohesion, and countering terrorism. All these eventually sprout from the simple water projects our club sponsored. I thought you all should know about that. That's the rest of the story, and we should be very proud of the great work our club does. Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you, Bill. I like the where in the world is as the theme. That's great. All right, next we have our good news bucket. So this is the portion of the meeting where I'll let Harriet explain. I won't take away your thunder, Harriet. So Harriet will do our good news buckets. Harriet is a DRCF trustee and also the president and owner of Logical Connections.
Thank you, President Debbie. I would like to welcome everyone to our time to acknowledge our good news. Our good news at this point of the year is going to the Denver Rotary Club Foundation. So a minimum contribution of $20. And those donations and many others contribute to projects like Bill Korstadt just discussed, the committee projects of the World Community Service Committee. We also donate to Denver Kids, Scholastic Arts, Junior Achievement, and many other projects. So in the chat, I put the link to donations for Denver Rotary Club Foundation. And with that, I would like to start it off with the good news and appreciation to everyone who worked last Saturday, the 12th, in the Rotary Club parking lot, checking people in, directing cars, slinging peaches, packing delivery cars, orange bags, on and on and on. Brian Geist, Jill Santuccio, Debbie Beasley, Lauren, of course, and many more. So thank you, thank you. And if you have good news, you can raise your hand and hopefully we'll see you, I or Lauren or Debbie. Or you can raise your hand through the participants list and we'll call on you.
I see Nancy Austin.
All right, let's go to Nancy first, and Louise, I'll call on you next.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm just happy to, my son and his wife from New York have been staying with us since June due to COVID so that they could get out of prison, so to speak, in Brooklyn. And I'm happy to announce that they bought a home and now live down the street from us in Cherry Creek. While I loved having them here, I'm happy to have my home back.
Terrific. Congratulations. Thank you very much. All right, Louise?
I am celebrating and so happy about my congregation's 160th birthday that will be celebrated this fall. And 160 years of trying to be a light and in our community and a good neighbor to all.
That's terrific news. Who else do we have?
I see Fred.
All right, Fred.
Unmute yourself, Fred, if you can. Let me see if I can help you.
How about now?
There you go. You're good.
Yeah, sorry on the slow on the draw there. Yeah, I just wanted to throw $20 in the bucket in honor of my wife and I celebrating Carol and I celebrating our 60th wedding anniversary recently. That's getting up there, so to speak.
Wow.
Congratulations, yes.
Thank you.
Quite an accomplishment.
And anyone else with good news? I don't see anyone else, so oh, Bill Korstad, I will call on you.
I'm in Colorado this week. We got shut out in August because of the bad weather, but I have had 3 or 4 straight days of beautiful hiking in the mountains, and I've missed it so, and I'm glad to be here to be able to do that.
Terrific. Did you get the snow and the heat?
No snow.
Okay. You came in after last weekend.
Yeah.
All right. And one more pass. Debbie, I will turn it back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Harriet. All right. With that, we'll turn it over to Brooke Schiffner for our program introduction. Brooke is our Temple Buell Scholar Chair and is also president of BWS Design Group. Brooke. Thank you.
Thanks for your background on Temple Buell, Mark. That was perfect. Today, I'd like to introduce Morgan Marzo and Jay Arehart. They are both winners of the 2018 Temple Buell Ambassadorial Scholarship. They represented each of you and all Rotarians during their studies abroad, starting in about August of 2019 until COVID interrupted and sent them home earlier this year. They have very different study subjects, which can be technical, but they're also both very fascinating. They have plenty to share and teach you today, and they can go way beyond our time limit, so they're going to do their best to shrink it. They're both very smart, they're dedicated and very kind. I think they give more than they take, and you will all easily recognize the values of Rotary with their studies and their personal lives. And on behalf of our Temple Buell Scholarship Committee, I am very, very proud to show them off to all of you today. So please enjoy Morgan and then Jay.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, and I really did appreciate this opportunity this past year. I was able to learn a lot, and I know I only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to try to whiz through the PowerPoint and keep it quick, but let's start here. All right. So I was lucky enough to be in Tokyo, Japan this last year. I was affiliated with Keio University, one of the universities in Tokyo, and I worked with two of the professors there. My basis research question was if we can build a more responsible disaster relief structure. And this is a background on some of our well-known disasters that inspired some of this research. The hurricane in the Bahamas, where 17% of the population was left homeless. In California, as we're seeing right now as well, with some of the fires just destroying all of the structures in its wake, and the cost and toll that that takes on the environment and the people there. New Orleans with Hurricane Katrina, and how people are still homeless even today. The reason I chose Japan is that they experience a lot of similar types of natural disasters and types of destruction to their structures. They also have an incredible history of craftsmanship and building, so I really looked towards them to learn from. And this was the famous earthquake, tsunami. So what exists right now in disaster relief recovery is internationally, the UN does a lot of incredible work to bring these types of structures to some of these areas that have been hit. And then there's also a lot of local methods that are used, but no real cross standard that's economically feasible, easy to ship, easy to erect. And a lot of the times they aren't built to last. And unfortunately, most of these communities aren't able to rebuild immediately after, even within a 5-year time period sometimes. So a lot of the times in the long term, it ends up failing. The USA has these trailer homes and manufactured houses that they do use, and this is what was actually used in Hurricane Katrina as well. But they're quite expensive, although they do suffice as a more long-term solution. Each one is around $60,000 on average. And they do unfortunately have some other issues as well. There's no use after. They're pretty much put up on eBay for other people to buy. There's a lot of missing components, it's slow delivery, and it can actually be toxic with some of the materials used. So I was looking at other people to learn from, and I'm going to go pretty quickly through these, but it's a lot of vernacular placemaking architecture that was also post-disaster. And then this is more of the vernacular, like looking towards the locals and seeing how they build. So Shigeru Ban is one of the professors that I was lucky enough to study under, and I did come across his work through this initial research, and I'll talk more about that later. And same with this professor who put this wood system in place. So our first project in August, when I got to Japan, I was in Japan for about 3 days, and then I left and went to Indonesia to help with a build. So it was in Palu, which you can see on the map. They were hit by a pretty intense earthquake, and it shook the land enough to cause a bunch of landslides, which is liquefaction. 68,000 houses were destroyed. There were three entire towns that were destroyed as well. I can show you in this video, it's a satellite view of one of the towns called Ballaroa, and you can just see how the land is completely taken away and those structures that go with it. So they were relocated, and there were these pretty big refugee camps at the bottom left. That one image is one of the refugee camps, and USAID sent some of the tents that I'd shown you earlier, but they were probably looking at about 2 or 3 years of living in the refugee camp, so we wanted to do something better to help. We ended up building this community center because the community had nowhere to gather in order to talk about rebuilding or celebrate events and keep their lives kind of continuing as normal as possible. We used a classical Japanese joinery technique. So you can see it uses a lock and pin method. And what this did is it was easy to assemble, and the community was able to come help us build. You can see in some of these were local students. Some of the refugees came and helped, and then there were some Japanese students as well. And I'm going to go pretty quickly, but you can see how easy it is to put together with the help of a couple people, and if everybody comes together to help. So this is a quick time lapse of what the building ended up looking like at the end. It took about a month to build. And then at the end, we celebrated by inviting anyone and everyone back to help us build stools using the same construction methods and to celebrate inside of the structure after we were done. Just more final photos. So that project really gave me the knowledge of community helping to build and participatory design. So I was looking at other areas for other cases in which this happened. This is another case study where they use local materials and local skills and had the community come build as well. As a lot more inexpensive. It went up very quickly in 1 week, and it was able to last for a lot longer, and the community learned how to disassemble, assemble, maintain, kind of could pay it forward in construction techniques. So this was a huge project to really empower the community as well, especially refugees who, you know, you lose kind of a lot of sense of control when your house is destroyed. So Shigeru, one of the other professors, he's known for his paper tube construction. He works with Voluntary Architects Network and has built all over the world using the same types of techniques. And what we were looking at, we researched a different kind of disaster tent. So perhaps something that could be easily shipped to a site while we're waiting to build more permanent structures. And it was built off of the concept of Japanese origami, so easily unfoldable and where there's a lot more space inside than you would imagine. We looked at using the same lock and key joinery technique from the Indonesia Community Center. We wanted to see how we can empower companies to also help and you know, kind of pay it forward with this social responsibility model. So what Japanese companies were really asking for at the time, because of open office space, was for these little phone booths and meeting booths. So we worked with a company to implement a one-for-one model where you design a meeting booth and we can go and easily assemble it at the office, and they can use it for a time period until a disaster hits, and then this company would actually sponsor the donation of a one-for-one model. So they would send that booth to a family that had been hit by disaster in order for them to be able to live comfortably and securely in one of these pods. So the research, unfortunately, my year was cut a little bit short because of COVID-19. And in March, when I was brought back from Japan, I continued to think about all of these methods of construction that I had learned and participatory design. And I wanted to see along the social role of architecture, how we could perhaps translate it into the current situation that was happening. And after seeing a lot of the hospital overflows that happened outside or in gymnasiums, I was looking at creating some sort of security privacy partition using the same joinery techniques. And then this translated also into perhaps an exterior pod structure. Specifically, I was interested in the slow disaster of homelessness and how they were getting hit by the virus at a higher rate than other populations. So the hospital partitions using the same method can be translated into this exterior pod with the addition of a door and a floor, and can pretty quickly be turned over into a separate module. So I want to talk quickly about the psychological rebuild process within the refugee communities. We did go and help physically rebuild, but with the inclusion of the community, there are all these side effects that we designed for. This is the Japanese concept of working collaboratively together. And what participatory design psychologically does is it helps stimulate the local economy. We use local labor. We have the inclusion of the refugees, the children in the community, and we buy local materials, so it does help fuel this recovering economy. We impart the knowledge of the construction methods, so the community actually learns how to build. If they have to disassemble and move, they're able to do that on their own. They can pay it forward and build more structures, and they know exactly how to do it. There's also this whole concept of taking back control and actively working towards the solution, which lends a sense of empowerment and sense of place that they might have lost within the disaster, kind of just feeling lost afterwards. This is where those two girls at the bottom left, they were one of the first ones to come and ask what we were doing, and they wanted to help in any way they could. The process really did start through the inclusion of some of the children. And it includes, so you have all these people that end up getting involved with this one project, so it brings together a lot of folks and is able to share knowledge with people who might not have had access to that otherwise. And planning for the side effects, so you have the physical, but then what else can come afterwards? So how can you psychologically enhance with the physical structure? And then if you can back it up with data, it will proliferate around the world, hopefully, as a new building model. And then just to wrap up, a future idea for how participatory engagement can be applied, especially in Denver, because that's where I'm currently based. After seeing some of the homeless encampments, I couldn't help but think if we could include the homeless community and maybe impart some of these skills and help them build their own temporary structures, and sort of what the future possibilities for something like that would be. Thank you.
All right, so I guess I will take over now. So hello everybody, my name is Jay Arehart, as you heard before, and I'm going to share a little bit about my experiences over the past year. So while Morgan was in Japan, I was in Edinburgh, Scotland. So this is up in the north of the UK, for those of you not super familiar with the geography, where I was working at Edinburgh Napier University with a couple of folks there on some of my dissertation research. So I was and still am a PhD student at the University of Colorado Boulder, but most recently I just transitioned to an instructor position where I'm teaching teaching full time while wrapping up my PhD. So this was a view that was just outside my house. I spent many an evening, especially during lockdown here, just to overlook the city. So it's one of my favorite vistas of the city. For those of you that haven't visited Edinburgh before, it's a great one to go to. But in terms of what I was doing as part of this fellowship or this scholarship was focusing around this question of how much carbon can be stored in construction materials. So I'm an architectural engineer, structural engineer specifically. And I was really inspired within my dissertation research to start looking at how buildings and the built environment can become part of the climate solution rather than being part of the problem. So we're familiar, or if you're not familiar already, buildings as a whole are responsible for 39% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And so about half of that goes to the operation of buildings, so the heating, lighting, etc. Whereas the other half of that is associated with the manufacturing of construction materials. So specifically, steel and cement are some of the most carbon intensive materials that we make. And just those two on their own are responsible for between 10 and 13% of global CO2 emissions. So when we think about, we've only been building with these materials for about the past 100 years, or maybe a little over the last 100 years. Previously, we built out of wood, we built out of straw, we built out of different construction materials. And while steel and concrete are great from a structural perspective, they have very favorable properties. What if we re-envisioned how we can now go back to those other construction techniques? And what might that impact be at the global scale when we start implementing this? Is we need to get our buildings to be net zero as a whole by 2050 if we're trying to avoid excessive temperature rise across the world. So I've approached this problem from two different scales. The first is from the material scale. So I've looked specifically at concrete and trying to quantify how much CO2 it actually can reabsorb over its lifetime. And it can reabsorb up to about 15% of its initial emissions, as well as hempcrete, which is a insulation material. It's made out of hemp shiv, as well as then a lime-based binder. So it is an alternative to some of the highly carbon-intensive insulation materials that we might make. So that was some of the work that I did initially before traveling to Scotland, of looking at the way, quantifying essentially from a materials perspective, how much carbon can be stored. I take a life cycle approach when I'm looking at these questions. So I don't just think about, what the emissions are at the beginning of the life, when it's in operation, or when it's at the end of life individually, but instead take a holistic approach and looking at and considering a life cycle approach. So going through all the different stages. So I was working with some folks that are part of the Resource Efficient Built Environment Laboratory at Edinburgh Napier University. And so this was a collaboration between CU Boulder and the Living Materials Laboratory, which I'm a part of. We do a lot of work in this lab regarding using bacteria to grow construction materials. We've had a lot of press recently that you might have come across of living buildings and living materials. So specifically, so that's sort of a large background about my research as a whole, but specifically what I worked on while in Scotland was thinking about how the United States building stock as a whole is going to evolve over the next 80 years. So the first thing that I worked on was I used satellite imagery and machine learning to estimate the total amount of floor space that currently exists in the US and in North America broadly. I also found a data set for Canada. But essentially, from using this new method of measuring the extent of our buildings, both how large they are from an area perspective, as well as how tall they are, that's where the machine learning came in. We were able to show that from the US government drastically underestimates the number of buildings and the size of buildings across the US. In fact, there's 3 times as much floor space as the Department of Energy estimates based on their surveys. So this was a really interesting finding. The fact that in the US the average person takes up about 300 square meters of floor space. So that includes both your house as well as, say, any commercial and industrial buildings that are associated with you. Whereas in contrast, Europe, they're around, say, 50 to 70 square meters of floor space per person. So in the US, buildings are a huge, are drastically underestimated, and as a result contribute significant amounts of carbon emissions. So from this, we were able to develop a model to predict floor space into the future. And so it's going to continue to increase until about 2060 and then level off towards 2100. But this also shows that we have a large opportunity for carbon storage. How can we now go back to use some of these carbon storing materials, so timber or hempcrete, straw bale, etc., in this construction and essentially use our buildings as a carbon battery or as a storage mechanism as we have all this new construction. So with that, we developed a whole model to evaluate this question. And essentially, the idea is to get to this greenhouse gas balance of at what point can we get our buildings to cross over this net zero line? Are we able to use enough timber-based materials and manage our forests properly in our buildings to have this greenhouse gallons be negative so that we are using the built environment as net carbon storing? And the answer is still to be determined. That'll be the last part of my PhD. But at this stage, we were able to quantify what the demand for structural materials was going to be into the future. And one key takeaway that I found interesting from this that we just recently published a paper on was that in the US specifically, we do not have enough forests to meet the potential demand of building all of our high-rise buildings out of wood. So you've probably heard, or you may have heard of the terms of mass timber construction and how that, and building skyscrapers out of wood is sort of the next phase of building design. But if we were to do that for all of our buildings, we're not going to have enough forests in America to do that. If we include Canada, we're maybe going to have enough. But that would basically take away most of our forests. It would lead to deforestation if we did this too much. So that was an interesting takeaway from this work. So this work was presented at 5 international conferences while I was abroad. Unfortunately, I didn't get to travel to Budapest and Spain as I was hoping to when I looked at the conferences, but instead we just presented them remotely. And then this will all be summarized in 4 peer-reviewed journal publications. So that was the main project that I focused on while in Scotland, but I wanted to touch on a couple other initiatives that I was working on as well during my time. The first one was with Project Drawdown. So Project Drawdown is a nonprofit organization that claims to be the world's leading resource for climate solutions. And so they have identified, mapped, and modeled over 100 different solutions that that draw down carbon or reduce carbon emissions in order to reverse global warming. And so I've been working with them, or I stopped right now, but I was working with them during my time over there to help do some modeling for them of evaluating if we adopted, say, for example, insulating our buildings more, what might that potential impact be? One thing to know is their solutions aren't just about buildings, aren't just about energy, but they look holistically across land use, as well as food solutions. And so if you haven't heard of them and you haven't seen their New York Times bestseller book, I encourage you to check out their website. And then another nonprofit that I was working with that's near and dear to my heart is this group called Engineers in Action. So they build pedestrian bridges across the world to provide last mile access to underserved communities. And they do this while engaging university students. And so I got involved with them when I was an undergraduate, and I've traveled to Southern Africa and Bolivia many, many times to work on these projects. But what I was doing most recently was taking all that knowledge that I had gained and translating it into an educational platform. So that way other university students, both in the US, Canada, and the UK, where our students are based, in addition to students in underserved countries. So for instance, engaging local university students in the countries in which we work, so Bolivia and Eswatini, in how to design and construct these footbridges. So if you're curious in seeing what these courses look like, I recorded about 40 to 60 hours of video and lectures, and they're all up at this website here at eiaeducation.org. So with that, I just wanted to share a couple photos from the time in Scotland. There were 2 other Rotary scholars there. They were doing a master's in public health, Rachel and Haley. But during the time, I traveled and talked to 9 different Rotary chapters across the District 1020 in Scotland. This one on the top left is they had a little write-up about my presentation and left it in the train station for everyone to see, which I thought was, and so Haley actually saw it when she went to go speak at the club at the train station. So it's a neat little thing. Here's another train station where there was a train sponsored by Rotary International that was much too small for me to sit in, but I tried anyways. As well as got out and explored the Highlands as best I could, even though COVID occurred. But this was me on a 50-kilometer race when I had first arrived. So with that, Morgan and I will be happy to answer any questions that you guys have about our time.
This is Debbie. Thank you so very much. We do have a couple of questions queued up. And interestingly, also Jim Johnston put in a satellite video of the site of Palu that Morgan showed. So take a look at that for everybody who's in the chat. The first question is, just curious what the group thinks the new, quote, new space plans look like for office, retail, restaurants, etc. if COVID-19 does not enjoy a magic bullet anytime soon. Any major adjustments that become necessary long-term will require huge collateral adjustments in the entire CRE business model for those property types. So that's for either one of you.
I got this question at my comprehensive exam, which is one of the big exams you take during your PhD. And my answer, I'll just share my answer briefly. I don't think we're going to see many significant shifts in the way we build buildings. The construction industry hasn't slowed down during this whole thing. We're still building. All the people I talk to in industry are busier than ever. I think it's going to end up being a blip on the radar as we go forward. And we're going to, unfortunately, go back to the way we built before. But that's just my perspective.
Morgan, did you want to add anything?
I was a little bit joking about starting an architecture firm based off of only patio construction and just have some sort of quick built exterior space so that people could, you know, socially distance and stay outside, because we've seen streets close down with everybody just trying to spread out and stay outdoors. But yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of building systems related as well with ventilation and
All right, another question, this one's for Jay. Do LEED standards address both environmental impact of building ops or also building construction?
Now there used to be a pilot credit for it, and now there is a credit, a material, in the materials track, there is a credit for it. It's not significant, it's weighted very low, but it is something that LEED is working on incorporating more, especially as we get our buildings to be much more energy efficient. So for instance, if you design if you produce as much power through solar panels as you consume, then your entire building, then all of your emissions for your building are associated with the materials. There's a trade-off too of if you insulate too much, you actually have a payback period of almost 100 years. So I'm happy to talk many, many more about that, but yes, there is something in LEED.
Another question, Jay. Have you worked with Bridges to Prosperity, another NGO working on foot traffic bridges around the world? It is based here in Denver.
Yeah, so my undergraduate experience was with them, and then their university program got spun out into Engineers in Action. So we're still very close and know a lot of the folks at B2P. Get beers with them often.
Nice.
I guess I used to.
All right, I'm looking through the chat and my chat to me. Anybody have any other questions? Put them in the chat. I will look through the list. A lot of comments about very significant questions you're addressing, and good presentation, and for joining us. And I'm going to put one more minute before we close out the Q&A. Anyone else?
This is Susan Steve from the Foundation, and while you're looking for questions, I'm President Buell and so proud of the membership with you all on this. Look at our amazing people. It's so exciting to see them on paper. You do it.